Close your eyes and taste the caramel that clung to your molars, the fizz of cola candy that made you laugh before you even swallowed. The 1960s weren't just about tie-dye shirts and rock and roll. They were about a kind of sweetness that seemed to belong to the soul. Back then, candy wasn't just something you ate. It was something you remembered. It lived in your pocket, stuck to the paper, and melted in your hand on the walk home from school. Every bite felt like a tiny celebration of being alive in a world that still felt small and safe. Across America, kids would crowd into corner stores after school, a few nickels jingling in their pockets, eyes scanning rows of brightly wrapped treasures. The shopkeeper always seemed to know their names. The air was thick with the smell of sugar and paper, and the glass jars glimmered under soft yellow light. Each wrapper told its own story: red and gold for fireballs, blue and silver for mint patties, cartoon faces grinning from bubble gum packs. The world outside could be loud and uncertain, but inside those aisles, everything was simple. Just color, laughter, and the promise of sweetness. Candy was a language of friendship back then. A pack of baseball cards meant trading not just players, but gum. A handful of licorice ropes could buy you a turn at the pinball machine. And if you shared your last caramel with someone, that meant something, because candy wasn't cheap, and neither was kindness. For kids of the 1960s, a small treat held big meaning. It was the taste of freedom, the reward for good grades, the peace offering after a fight. Even grown-ups had their favorites tucked away in desk drawers. Peppermint patties, Bit-O honey, and chocolate bars that snapped cleanly in two. The sounds of that world were just as sweet. The soft clink of glass bottles in the soda cooler, the cheerful hum of a Coca-Cola sign, the gentle rustle of wax paper as candy was handed over the counter. Every sense was alive. You could smell the faint chocolate from the factory down the block, feel the sticky sugar on your fingers, hear the laughter of kids outside comparing who got the biggest jawbreaker. It wasn't just about the candy. It was about belonging to a moment in time when joy came wrapped in foil and priced at a dime. Today, it's easy to forget that candy once felt personal. Before factories stamped out millions of bars a day, each treat felt crafted for you. The packaging was charming, the flavors were bold, and the experience of opening it, tasting it, and sharing it was almost ceremonial. People didn't eat candy while scrolling on screens. They savored it, sitting on porches or walking home from school under golden light. Those flavors, simple as they were, managed to hold entire memories inside them. But before mass production took over every shelf, snacks were made with something rare. A road trip wasn't complete without a stop at the gas station with a squeaky door, a soda machine that clunked out glass bottles, and a rack of treats that could make any kid's eyes light up. Root beer barrels, candy cigarettes, Slim Jims, and those tiny wax cola bottles filled with syrupy liquid, each one felt like a treasure waiting to be discovered. The 1960s highway wasn't just asphalt and billboards. It was a ribbon of freedom that stretched from town to town, dotted with pit stops that smelled like gasoline, rubber, and sugar. Families packed into station wagons, windows rolled down, radios humming with the Beach Boys. Dad fueled up while Mom grabbed maps and paper cups of coffee, and the kids ran inside with a single mission: pick one treat for the road. Maybe it was a pack of candy buttons stuck to a strip of paper, or a packet of Fun Dip that left tongues bright green. There was no rush. The world moved slower then, and the small act of choosing a snack felt like an adventure of its own. Every gas station had its own flavor. Some had a spinning metal rack of comic books and postcards beside the counter. Others sold homemade fudge wrapped in wax paper. The clerk might nod as you counted out your dimes, bagging your candy in a brown paper sack. The hum of the refrigerator, the rattle of the cash register, the faint smell of oil and peanuts all blended into a soundscape uniquely American. These weren't sterile convenience stores lit by harsh LEDs. They were roadside sanctuaries where strangers shared a smile and kids learned the joy of small decisions. and the packaging that stuck in my memory. Bold fonts, bright stripes, cartoon mascots grinning from wrappers that seemed to promise mischief. The design spoke of optimism and playfulness, a reflection of an America still fueled by curiosity and creativity. Every snack felt like a souvenir, a reminder that you'd been somewhere new, even if it was just the next town over. For many families, the ride itself was the destination. The back seat became a world of laughter, sing-alongs, and sticky fingers. A wax bottle of cola was passed around. Candy cigarettes dangled from grinning mouths, and melted chocolate bars were rescued from the heat with paper napkins. Those moments were messy and imperfect, but that's what made them beautiful. There was a kind of freedom in the open road, a sense that the country was endless, and so were its small joys. Each trip began with a full tank and ended with an empty candy wrapper, a quiet symbol of a time when life's sweetness came in small doses. Those gas station goodies weren't just snacks. They were memories you could hold, unwrap, and taste. But once you were home, the magic continued right in your neighborhood store. Woolworth's counters smelled like fries and fudge. You could buy a comic, a Coke, and a candy bar, all for under $1. For a kid in the 1960s, that felt like wealth beyond measure. The Five and Dime store was more than a place to shop. It was a gathering spot, a miniature version of Main Street where everyone seemed to belong. The shelves were low, the aisles narrow, and the sound of the soda fountain hissed like a soft heartbeat in the background. The air carried the mix of popcorn, wax paper, and the faint sweetness of penny candy that drew you in the moment you walked through the door. These stores were built on small joys. A nickel could buy you a handful of Jawbreakers, a strip of Turkish taffy, or a wax paper packet of peanuts to drop into your glass bottle of Coke. Kids pressed their noses to the candy counter glass, carefully choosing their prize, while grown-ups browsed the aisles for sewing kits or greeting cards. It was the kind of place where time didn't rush you. You could sit at the lunch counter, sip your soda through a paper straw, and feel like you were part of something simple and good. The soda fountains were the heart of it all. Chrome stools, red leather seats, and a friendly clerk in a white apron who seemed to know exactly how much whipped cream you liked on your sundae. Teenagers shared milkshakes with 2 straws. Shoppers rested their feet with a slice of pie. And kids sat wide-eyed at the counter, waiting for their ice cream float to arrive with a clink of glass. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the ritual, the rhythm of small-town life wrapped around a fountain of fizz and foam. Every town had its own version, sometimes a Woolworth's, sometimes a Ben Franklin, or a Kresge's. No matter the name on the sign, the feeling was the same. The clerks knew the locals, the regulars had their favorite seats, and there was always a sense of comfort in seeing the same smiling faces week after week. You could walk in after school with a few coins and walk out with a Mallow cup, a Clark bar, and a memory that would last decades longer than the flavor itself. For kids, the Five and Dime was a place of first, the first time they paid with their own money, the first time they treated a friend, the first time they realized how small things could make you feel big. There was a quiet magic in the way those stores brought people together. You didn't need much to be happy, just a counter stool and something sweet to share. But not every treat survived the march of time, and some vanished almost overnight. Remember space food sticks or marathon bars that seemed to stretch forever? These weren't just snacks, they were eras in a wrapper. Each one carried a story, a flash of childhood that dissolved as quickly as the candy itself. The shelves of the 1960s and 70s were filled with treats that today live only in memory. The 7-Up bar with its 7 different fillings, the tangy bite of Regal Crown Sours, the chewy sweetness of PB Max. They vanished quietly, one by one, as the years rolled on victims of mergers, costs, and changing tastes. But for those who grew up with them, their absence still feels personal. Every candy aisle once felt like an adventure. You could find something new, something strange, a chocolate bar inspired by space travel, or a fruit chew the promised atomic flavor. Space food sticks, for example, captured the imagination of a generation dreaming of rockets and moon landings. They weren't just candy. They were a taste of the future. The marathon bar, a long, twisted rope of caramel covered in chocolate, stretched like a dare, challenging kids to finish it before it melted. Each snack had its own kind of magic, a mix of flavor and fantasy that gave the 1960s its charm. But time is unkind to novelty. When companies merged or changed hands, recipes shifted, packaging evolved, and suddenly the candies that once felt eternal were gone. Sometimes it was the cost of ingredients, sometimes new regulations, and sometimes just the slow fade of popularity. The 7-Up bar was too complex to make, PB Max too expensive, and others simply lost their audience in a world that demanded convenience over craft. Yet even as they disappeared, they left behind echoes of fragments of jingles, faded ads in old magazines, and stories told by parents who remembered the taste. The marketing back then was an art of wonder. Bright, hand-drawn posters promised adventure and joy. Commercials featured smiling kids, astronauts, cartoon mascots, all selling more than sugar. They sold belonging, excitement, and a kind of faith in the everyday. These snacks became emotional landmarks. What you ate at the drive-in, what your dad bought you after Little League, what your mom tucked into your lunchbox just because. And when they vanished, it wasn't just a candy that disappeared. It was a piece of childhood quietly folded into history. Nostalgia has a sweetness all its own, but it's never without a sting. Remembering these lost treats reminds us that even simple pleasures can fade, not because they stop tasting good, but because the world around them changes. The factories close, the labels fade, and new generations grow up never knowing what they missed. Yet for those who were there, the memory remains vivid. The texture, the smell, the joy of tearing open that wrapper. But every flavor tells a story, and some snacks carry the taste of an entire generation. Cherry, caramel, and cream are simple flavors that felt like home. In the 1960s, snacks didn't just taste good. They meant something. Each bite carried a story, a moment, a familiar comfort that reached deeper than flavor alone. The chocolate wasn't overly sweet. The caramel had just the right pull, and the malted milk balls melted slowly, coating the tongue in a way that felt almost tender. It was a decade when food was less about variety and more about feeling, about the way a taste could linger long after the last bite was gone. Every flavor had its own kind of personality. Root beer candy, with its old-fashioned fizz and bite, brought to mind soda fountains and laughter echoing off tile floors. Banana taffy had the color of summer afternoons, while creamy nougat bars felt like a small luxury, something you unwrapped carefully to make it last. The simplicity was the magic. There weren't endless flavor combinations or experimental fusions. Just pure, recognizable sweetness that anyone could love. You didn't need to read an ingredient list. You just trusted it, and that trust mattered. Many snacks still had a handmade touch, dipped, wrapped, or folded by people who took pride in what they made. You could taste the difference between something created with care and something cranked out by a machine. Even the imperfections, a bar that broke unevenly, a caramel that stuck to the wrapper, became part of the charm. It was food that felt human. Those flavors were woven into the rhythm of everyday life. A candy bar tucked into a lunchbox, a root beer float at the drive-in, a handful of malt balls shared at a Saturday matinee. They marked the milestones of growing up, a reward for mowing the lawn, a comfort on a rainy day, a treat handed over by a smiling parent after dinner. Taste became a kind of time machine, anchoring memories to the senses the way a smell or a flavor could suddenly bring back an entire moment as vivid as the day it happened. What made the flavors of the 1960s so enduring wasn't just the taste. It was the honesty behind them. They weren't trying to impress. They weren't chasing trends. They were familiar, reliable, and made to be shared. Even decades later, when someone bites into a chocolate bar with real caramel or sips a soda that still uses cane sugar, it feels like stepping back into that world for a moment when everything was a little slower, a little simpler, and a lot more sincere. But America's taste buds were about to change, and not everyone liked where it went. What used to be made by hand was now made by machine, and something got lost in the recipe. By the late 1960s, the gentle art of candy making had begun to give way to the hum of assembly lines and the precision of mass production. Factories grew bigger, ingredients cheaper, and the pursuit of efficiency slowly began to replace the pursuit of flavor. What once felt personal, a chocolate bar wrapped by hand or fudge stirred in a copper pot, was now standardized, sealed, and stacked by the thousands. America was learning to love convenience, even if it came at the cost of character. The change crept in quietly at first. Artificial flavors promised consistency. Preservatives stretched shelf lives. Corporate slogans filled the airwaves, convincing families that modern meant better. And in a way, it worked. The world was moving faster. Families were busier, and packaged snacks fit neatly into lunchboxes and glove compartments. But beneath the bright wrappers and catchy jingles, the texture of something deeper began to fade. Candy that once had a homemade chew became softer, sweeter, less real. The warmth of small-town craftsmanship was replaced with the sterile hum of machinery. As big corporations took over, smaller candy makers struggled to survive. Local confectioners who had served their communities for generations found themselves competing with national brands whose logos filled supermarket shelves. Mergers and acquisitions rolled through the industry, swallowing up the names that once stood proudly on corner stores. Familiar labels disappeared, recipes changed, and the old candy counters that once offered choice and charm now gave way to uniform displays that looked the same in every town. Advertising mirrored the shift. Instead of focusing on quality or tradition, brands began selling speed, convenience, and excitement. Candy became a lifestyle accessory, something quick, fun, and mass-produced for a generation raised on television. Commercials shouted instead of whispered. The emotional connection faded. What had once been a quiet indulgence, a small joy shared between friends, was now a product built for scale. And yet, behind every brightly colored box was a quiet sense of loss. The flavors were louder, but somehow emptier. The chocolate was smoother, but less satisfying. The nostalgia that once came from tasting something real was replaced by the hollow sweetness of imitation. For many Americans, the change was invisible at first. Only years later, when they reached for an old favorite and realized it didn't taste quite the same, did the truth settle in progress and rewritten the recipe. It wasn't just about candy anymore. It was about how the country itself was changing from personal to industrial, from handmade to high speed. The world became more efficient, yes, but also more distant. And while companies grew richer, America's flavors grew flatter. From Hollywood Candy Company to Necco, the logos may be gone, but their wrappers still live rent-free in our memories. There was a time when every town had its own candy hero, a local name painted on a weathered sign, a brand that never needed national fame to win the hearts of its neighbors. The 1960s were filled with these small but mighty confectioners, each one pouring their personality into a bar, a bag, or a tin. They made sweets that tasted like home regional treasures that disappeared as quietly as they once arrived. The Hollywood Candy Company, born in Minnesota, gave us the milkshake bar and the zero bar treats that somehow balanced creamy nougat and caramel in perfect chewy harmony. Necco, the New England Confectionery Company, was even older. Its pastel wafers packed in simple paper rolls became a staple of lunchboxes and movie theaters for nearly a century. There were others too, Bratch's Leaf Pearsons, and countless mom-and-pop factories that gave flavor to the corners of America most of us will never see again. Each of these brands carried more than just recipes. They carried stories of factory workers who wrapped candies by hand, of salesmen who knew their customers by name, of jingles that played through AM radios on summer afternoons. Their packaging wasn't designed by committees. It was drawn with heart. Swirling fonts, bold reds and golds, smiling mascots that felt like friends. To a child in the 1960s, tearing into a candy bar wasn't just about sugar. It was about identity, belonging, and joy in its simplest form. But as the candy business consolidated, the individuality of these companies began to fade. Bigger corporations bought them out, merged them, or quietly retired their product lines. Shelf space became a battlefield where only the most profitable survived. The quirky, regional brands that once defined small-town charm were replaced by uniform packaging and predictable flavors. What had once been a mosaic of creativity became a carefully managed empire of sameness. And yet, even as the logos disappeared, they never truly left us. Collectors today still frame those old wrappers' Necco's stripes, Hollywood's cursive lettering, Clark's bold red script as if preserving relics of a sweeter time. Some can still hum the jingles or recall the feel of foil between their fingers. The memories linger, not because the candy was perfect, but because it represented something rare: authenticity. Those forgotten brands were more than companies. They were characters in America's story, symbols of a time when even the smallest business could create something unforgettable. And though their factories have long gone silent, their echoes remain in the hearts of those who once lined up with a nickel in hand, ready to choose their favorite from the rainbow of possibilities. But in the age of retro revivals, a sweet surprise was waiting around the corner. Guess what's back? Candy bars, sodas, and snacks reborn by fans who refuse to forget. Decades after their disappearance, the sweet ghosts of the 1960s have begun to rise again, not from corporate boardrooms, but from the memories of those who once loved them. In small kitchens, nostalgic message boards, and retro candy shops tucked between coffee bars and vinyl stores, the comeback crunch has begun. It's proof that some cravings never fade. They just wait for someone to bring them home. The return started quietly. When the Necco wafer reappeared on shelves in 2020, it felt like a reunion with an old friend. Fans posted photos, shared memories, and stocked up as if the world had just rediscovered a forgotten treasure. Not long after, other vintage favorites like Zagnut, Chocolate, and Marathon-style caramel bars began to find new life. Some came back through small-batch artisans determined to honor the originals. Others were revived by companies who finally realized that nostalgia itself is a flavor people crave. This wave of revival wasn't just about candy. It was about community. Online forums and Facebook groups turned into virtual time machines, where people swapped recipes for homemade Astropops or traded stories about the first time they tried a root beer barrel. Collectors photograph vintage wrappers and tins like museum curators preserving a country's edible history. Retro candy stores began popping up in towns across America, their glass jars filled with the colors and shapes of a childhood long gone. Walking through one feels like stepping into the past. The jingling of a cash register, the crinkle of wax paper, the hum of neon lights spelling out words like malt, fudge, and cola. What's surprising is how younger generations have embraced it all. Kids who never knew the 1960s are falling in love with candies their grandparents once adored. They retasting history sometimes for the first time and realizing that these simple flavors carry a warmth modern snacks can't quite replicate. It's not just about sugar. It's about story. Every bite connects eras, linking past and present through something universal. The joy of flavor, the comfort of memory. Brands have taken notice. Marketing today has rediscovered the power of heritage with ads that lean into vintage design and storytelling instead of flashy gimmicks. The labels look familiar again with slightly faded fonts, hand-drawn mascots, bold retro colors. In a world that moves too fast, There's comfort in slowing down for a taste of something that's endured. This revival isn't just a trend. It's a quiet rebellion against the disposable, a reminder that what's real and heartfelt never truly expires. The comeback crunch proves that nostalgia isn't about living in the past. It's about keeping the best parts of it alive. Because some flavors were never just about food, they were about feeling. Close your eyes, unwrap the memory, and take a bite. The 1960s may be gone, but their flavor still lingers. Somewhere between the crackle of a candy wrapper and the first sweet rush on your tongue, time folds in on itself. You're back in the corner store, quarters jingling in your pocket, the scent of sugar and soda syrup filling the air. Every taste is a doorway, not just to a snack, but to the feeling of being young, free, and full of wonder. Taste is memory's most loyal companion. Long after the signs have faded and the brands have vanished, one bite can bring it all rushing back to laughter of friends, the hum of summer cicadas, the shine of chrome on a diner stool. Food has a way of holding on to the pieces of who we were, even when the world moves on. The candies of the 1960s didn't just sweeten life. They flavored it with connection. They were there at birthday parties, movie nights, school lunches, and Sunday drives. Small joys that stitched families and generations together. Nostalgia, at its heart, isn't about wanting to go back. It's about remembering that life once felt slower, simpler, and somehow more real. The snacks of that era weren't perfect. They were handmade, uneven, sometimes messy, but that's what made them human. They were pieces of care wrapped in paper, built from recipes that came from homes, not machines. Each one carried a story, and when we taste them again, we rediscover not just flavor, but feeling. Across generations, that connection still endures. Grandparents share old candies with their grandchildren, laughing as they describe how it used to taste. Those moments, small as they seem, keep history alive in the most personal way possible through the senses. In an age of endless choices, we still crave what feels authentic, which reminds us that life's sweetest moments were never mass-produced. Maybe that's why the return of vintage snacks feels like more than a trend. It feels like healing. It reminds us that memory has texture, that emotion has taste, that even as the world spins faster, we can still find comfort in the things that shaped us. A candy bar, a soda pop, a simple stick of gum. They're time machines in disguise, built from sugar and stories. The 1960s taught us that food could be joy, and that joy could be shared. Those flavors haven't vanished. They've just been waiting in recipe cards, in attic boxes, in the corners of memory where sweetness never spoils. So maybe it's time to unwrap one more memory, to taste something old and remember something true. Because while decades pass and brands fade, some flavors were never meant to disappear. What was your favorite forgotten snack from the 1960s? Drop it in the comments. Let's remember together.